All right. Hi, welcome to lesson 2 of making apps on Xcode and Android Studio. My name is Jessica. I'm a senior computer science major at University of Maryland College Park. Um, and today I'll just teach you how to make a simple app using Java and or Swift. So I've created Android and iOS apps, both for hackathons and for classes. And hopefully by the end of this lesson, you'll be able to know how to create a simple mobile app. So for this lesson, I'm just gonna go over some basic concepts that you should know when it comes to making mobile apps. And then I'm gonna go through some demos on how to make an Xcode app in Xcode and how to make an app in Android Studio. You don't really have to watch through both of them unless you want to know how to make both an iOS and an Android app. Feel free to skip between these two demos. If you just want to make an iOS app, just watch the Xcode demo and vice versa. And then finally, I'm just going to give you some tips that I personally think I hope will help you when it comes to mobile development. So first, let's just go over some very basic terms when it comes to making any sort of user interface. So first is, what is a graphic user interface, or as we like to call it, GUI? A graphic GUI is basically the part of a program that a user interacts directly with. So for example, on this web browser, I have like a bunch of buttons. I have like text boxes that I can sort of interact with. There's like sliders. There's a lot of things that I can sort of like click on or drag or something like that. And this is all part of your GUI. This is all stuff that I can directly interact with. Even like at this bottom, this taskbar over here, all of these buttons, these are all part of the GUI too. Next is, what is an event? An event is any sort of user interaction. So for example, a button click is an event. More importantly, when it comes to your phones that have touch screens, taps, swipes, and swipes are events. If I want to like drag a slider, that's an event. And events are usually connected to event handlers, which is our next term. And event handlers are basically the method that kind of reacts to an event. So for example, when I click this new slide button and it adds a slide, the method that adds the new slide is the event handler, and it's reacting to whenever I push this new slide button. And finally, we're just going to go over a very basic UI concept, which is the model view controller idea. So this is sort of a general guideline you sort of want to, or a general way to think about a GUI or like a basic user application that helps you sort of organize your code into 3 separate parts. The first one is the model. The model is sort of the part of the code that really does the meat of what the application does. So for example, I have this calculator app. Whenever I press like, say I press like 789 times 6 equals, and it'll return me the function or the result. The part of this calculator app that actually does the math is part of the model. So that is whoever does the meat of the application. So so for like, just like with our calculator example, any part that does the math will be part of the model. Next is the view. The view is whatever you see on your application. So like these buttons, these numbers, the history bar up here, these are all part of the view. And then finally, you have your controller. The controller is whatever controls was being shown on the view. So say I press this clear button, it will turn these numbers into 0. And that is what the controller does. So the controller is whoever has the event handler that sort of clears the text box up here. And as with as you can see on this image, the user sees the view, but the user actually uses the controller, and the controller manipulates the model. So it like passes in all the data, for example, and the model then updates the view. So basically, whenever I'm pressing these buttons, I'm actually interacting directly with the controller here. Then when I like perform a function, so like 6988 times 9 equals, the controller will then pass the numbers I pressed in to the model, and then the model will do all the number crunching and then update the view with the results. And I'll see the results through the view. So first off, let's just have a general demo on how to make an iOS app.
All right, so first off, I'm gonna just walk you through creating a basic iOS app. So right now, I'm gonna open Xcode. And then on this side, I've already created a basic app template, Cool App iOS. This is just an empty application. So like I haven't written any code. I haven't added any like fancy elements to the UI yet. So right now I have two files open. These are the two most important files in Swift or in Xcode. First off is the Viewcontroller.swift. If you remember the MVC model, the model view controller model, the view is what the user sees and the controller controls the views. So basically, the view controller is just as it is. It'll tell the view like what to show, what to return, or like how to, it'll basically keep track of like what events do I have to react to and stuff like that. So this will control like what is shown inside the application. The next most important file is your main.storyboard file. This is basically a overview of what the app looks like right now. As you can see, like there's nothing, it's just an empty app. So this is where you'll see like your buttons or your labels pop up. And this is where we'll be adding buttons and labels. Usually I like to keep these two files side by side just so I can see like what exactly my app looks like right now and what code I should write to control what my app looks like. So if you want to add like an extra panel, like sort of like this, there's a button on this side called Add Editor on right. And that will basically add like an extra panel. So you can just see things side by side, which will be really useful once you start coding more complex things. Something you'll also have is your inspectors. So if you see this panel to your right, that'll open all your inspectors. So once we start adding things, you'll start to see things pop up over here. This is basically telling you information about different elements in your UI. So like what color is my background, or like things like text color, size, things that you can customize, and just general information about like different parts of your application. But right now we can close that. So I'll just press it again to hide it. On the left, you'll have your file explorer. So this will just tell you like what files are part of this project. I don't really like to keep this open because it kind of takes up a lot of space, and I don't tend to like navigate my files that often. So you can actually press this hide or show navigator, and that'll just hide it for you. Next, over here, this is basically telling you simulator information. So if I ever want to like test run my app, this is the kind of phone that my app will run. Make sure that you're running it on like a pretty current iPhone. You don't want to accidentally make an app for like an iPod Touch or like an iPad when you want to make it for like an iPhone 12 or something like that. I would recommend you keep it iPhone 11 or 12 because I'm pretty sure these are the most recent phones. I'm actually not too sure, but we'll pretend these are the most recent phones. All right, so let's first start off by just adding something pretty basic to our app. So if I go up to this top right and I press this plus button, after I've clicked into this main.storyboard, it'll basically show you a library of like all the things you could possibly add into your application. But let's start off with something simple. How about like a label? So I'm just gonna place this right here in the center. Something to keep in mind though is that just because you've kind of placed your label sort of arbitrarily in the center of your phone screen, it doesn't necessarily mean that that label will appear as is when you run it. Just keep in mind that computers are kind of dumb. And if you don't tell them that, like, if you don't tell them specifically where you've placed something within your GUI, they won't know where exactly to put it. So if I run this right now, my label might actually appear like on the top left right here because my computer right now has no idea where exactly this label is. I've sort of just placed it at a random place and I haven't given it any instructions on where it should load this label. So what I'm gonna do first is I'm gonna press Control, not Command, Control, and I'm gonna click and then drag from my label to my view and then drop. And it'll bring you up to this menu. These are basically a list of constraints that you can have. And constraints are basically instructions that you tell the computer on where to place your label. So I'm placing my label relative to the general view of the app. So for example, I can center it horizontally in the safe area. And that just means that I'm putting my label in the horizontal center of my app. And once I've made that constraint, you'll see a solid blue line appear. And that's basically telling you now the computer knows where to put the label horizontally. However, where can it place it vertically? So like it could be placed, like should it be placed over here? Should it be placed on the top? The computer doesn't exactly know. So let's give it another direction. So I'm going to control drag and then drop again. And then let's put it relative to the top space in the safe area. So right now I've sort of said that this label is this far from the top of my app and directly in the horizontal center. And something you can also do is Xcode will also warn you if there aren't enough constraints put on the label or like anything else that might break the app's GUI. So I've just clicked on the yellow arrow, which is just a warning about the constraints. And it will show me any warnings or any concerns Xcode has about where exactly this label is. So I'm just going to click on this yellow warning sign and just see like what exactly is wrong. So it looks like the constraints don't exactly match what's being shown on the storyboard. So let's see what we can do about it. I'm just going to update the constraint and then fix misplacement. And then let's see, update the frames. And there we go. The general rule is that if you don't see any like red or yellow warning or error signs in this this side view over here, you're generally good to go. Like basically your constraints won't break your app. So right now we have basically a label that's just called label in the center of our app. If you want to change the default text, you can just double click and then type in whatever you want into this label. I'm just going to type in starting text. And there we go. We have a label called starting text. And then let's add something else too. Let's add like a button. And I'm just going to put a button Right there sounds fine. And then just like with the label, I now have to tell the computer exactly where this button is relative to everything else in the app. So for example, I'm just going to control click on the button and then drag it. And then just tell the computer that, yeah, I want to center it horizontally. And now we need to sort of tell it where the button is vertically. So I'm just going to control click. And let's say I can definitely tell it where it is relative to the general overall view of the app. But let's say I more specifically want to tell the computer where my button is relative to starting text. So we'll just click and drag. So what I've done is I've controlled clicked, and instead of dragging to this view, I've dragged it to starting text. And as you can see, it's highlighted by the red. And I'll let go. And then I'll just click on this vertical spacing constraint. And as you can see, the vertical bar goes from starting text to button. So the computer now knows that it sort of has to place button vertically relative to the label starting text. And as you can see, no warnings and no errors. So we're good to go. So next we'll be doing a little bit of light coding. So for example, let's say for this button, I sort of want the app to do something whenever I click on it. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna control click and then drag and then drop to the bottom over here. As you can see, Xcode is sort of highlighting a line within the Swift code, and it's saying insert action outlet or outlet collection. So that is, we're just gonna place sort of, this is like Xcode basically telling us where we're gonna place our event handler. So I'm just gonna place it over here. I'm gonna let go, and it's gonna ask me if I want to add anything. So basically, this is just an event handler. You can tell when it says the connection is action. You don't have to worry about this object view controller for now. What we're gonna just give it a name called, let's just call it on clicked. So this is just an event handler, which is a method called on clicked. And we're gonna make it a type UI button. So it's gonna accept an event from a UI button whenever that button is touched up inside. And then we're just gonna press connect. And this is our event handler. You can tell that's connected when the circle is filled. And let's say every time we click the button, let's just print out button clicked. Save it. And we can actually just run our app right now. So I'm going to start the simulator. It's going to take a little while, but what should happen is that every time I click the button, this will basically print in the console at the bottom. And this is a little unintuitive for coding, but this clicking and dragging is very important. This is basically how you're going to add your event handlers. All right, so our simulator has started up, and we're just going to wait for the app to load. There you go. So as you can see, this is kind of reflected from our storyboard. We have the starting text up here, and we just have a button called button. We could change the name later, but for now, I'm just going to press this button. So I've clicked on it, and as you can see at the console on the bottom, it's printed out button clicked. So that's just to show that our event handler is it works. So let's just change the name of this button first. Just like with the label, I'm just going to double click on the button, and we're just going to call it, let's say something like click here. There we go. So next, generally for apps, you don't really want to print things to console because unless you're debugging, because the user's not really going to see it. No one's really going to have the console open, or they're not going to run your app through Xcode, right? So you kind of want things to show on your app screen. So that's where we're going to add outlet. So just like with a button, we're going to control click on starting text, and we're going to drag. But instead of dragging to the bottom over here, we're going to drag to the top. And we're going to add something called an outlet. So we're just going to let go. You can see the connection is the outlet. And we're going to name this, let's say, label outlet. And just checking, it's a type UI label, so that's correct. And we're just going to click connect. So an event unlike an event handler, which is just like a reaction to an event, an outlet is will be something that you can change. So when I have this outlet connected, it means that I can actually change like whatever's in this label. So within our event handler on clicked, I can add something like label outlet dot text equals clicked with 2 exclamation points. And then we can even change like the label outlet color by doing something like label outlet dot could say text color equals UI color dot purple. Sure. So basically what should happen, and wait a minute, I'm just going to comment that code out. What should happen now is that when I click the button, the text is going to change to clicked with 2 exclamation points, and the text color is going to change to purple. So let's try that out. All right. So as you can see here, starting text, and the button's called click here now. I'm going to click over here, and voila, we have the label changed, both text and color. So that's basically the general gist of coding a very simple app for iOS. Another thing to take into consideration is this function called viewDidLoad. So what viewDidLoad is it's a function that runs every time this specific view loads. So basically, once you start coding more complex apps, you're going to have a bunch of different views. So like, for example, you have an app that like, if you press a button, it'll like go to a different page or something. That different page is a completely different view. So once you, every time like you go to a specific view, the Viewcontroller will run this function viewDidLoad. And you'll have different view controllers for different views. So like right now, I only have this one specific view, but say I have like, instead of like this click here button affecting start text, say like every time I clicked here, it went to like a completely different page with like a completely different look. That completely different page will have its own view controller that will have its own viewDidLoad function. However, if I go from that second page back to this current page, this specific viewDidLoad will run. So in general, for each view controller, you'll have a function called viewDidLoad And that view did load will run every time that specific view is reloaded. And this is basically important if you want to like set any value or variables, or do any call any specific function that you only basically want to run once every time like a specific page is loaded. And yep, that's basically the general gist of how to create apps for iOS. I definitely haven't talked about all of the different kinds of like UI elements that you can basically put on your app. So, for example, there are definitely a lot of different stuff like segmented controls, text fields, sliders, and stuff like that. Unfortunately, there isn't a lot of time to really like get into depth for all of these different types of elements. I would highly recommend you check them out on your own. However, like they generally all work the same. They'll all like require something like they'll how to create outlets and event handlers for them is generally the same, and you'll definitely have to like work with constraints and stuff for all of them.
All right, so next we're going to talk a little bit about creating a basic Android app. So right now I've opened an Android project called Button App, and this is just an empty app or an empty activity as it's called in Android Studio. So this is just an app that has nothing. For Android Studio, the two important files that you want to have open are your Activitymain.xml, which is basically what's shown right here. It's just like an overview of what your app looks like, and your main activity.java, which is going to hold all your events and your event handlers. It's basically the controller, if you remember the MVC model. So let's first take a look at activitymain.xml. So first off, on the right over here, this is just like your list of attributes. So it's just going to tell you what what event handlers or how big your UI elements are and stuff like that. On the left here is your palette. This is just like a bunch of different UI elements that you can sort of add to your app. Let's first just add something pretty basic. So a text view, which is just like text on your application. So right now we've added a basic text view with what seems to be like the middleware app. But just keep in mind again that like your computer is kind of dumb. It kind of doesn't really know exactly like where it's supposed to sort of put things in your app unless you tell it very specifically where to put it. So as you can see in our component tree, we have an error on constraints because we haven't told our computer where exactly we have to put this text view. So let's do just that. I'm going to right click on text view and we're going to scroll down to center. And I'm just going to center this text view horizontally. And you can see these squiggly lines just show that it's centered horizontally. And next, I'm going to make a constraint to tell it where it is vertically. So I'm going to hover over this blue circle and I'm going to control and I'm going to click and drag to the very top. And as you can see, the top bar is highlighted in blue. And there we go. That's just going to tell our computer just where exactly this text view is. And to change the default text, I can just if I can scroll in far enough, I can just go to this side over here and just change the default string in text view. So let's just change it to something like, and there we go. As you can see, there's a warning, and that's just because Android Studio really likes us putting our strings more as resources. So there's a file called, I believe it's called res.xml or something, and you can basically store different kinds of strings and basically constants within it, and then refer to it in the and sort of just like refer to them when you're like when you want to like insert text or anything. But for now, we're gonna just leave that alone for now. So next, let's add another UI element. For example, a button. So I'm gonna just click on buttons, and we're just gonna add a basic button. Let's say over here. And just like with the text view, I'm going to constrain it by right-clicking. And I personally like centering it horizontally, so let's just do that. And you can constrain it however you like. You just have to make sure that you're giving very specific directions on where these elements are placed within the app, or else the computer won't know and it'll freak out and your app might break. So let's actually constrain this button relative to starting text. So for starting text, when I wanted to tell the computer where it was vertically, I just control-click and drag it to the top. But how about for a button, let's instead control-click on this top circle and drag it to the bottom of starting text, right over there. And that's just gonna tell the computer that I'm gonna place my button relative to starting text. And then let's just rename the button by calling it click here. There we go. So next, let's add an event handler for our button. So I'm going to go to mainActivity.java, and we're going to add just a function called public void onClick. And it's going to take in a view, one view. And views are generally just like visible UI elements within your Android app. So like, for example, your text view is a view. This entire app's background is a view. So it's just going to take in view. And if you have any issues like with this view, like the Android Studio might say something like, oh, the class view hasn't been imported, you can always fix that by importing it here. So make sure you have this line, import android.view.view, and that error should be solved. So now we have our event handler, but we need to connect it to this event. So whenever the button's clicked, which is the event, we need to have this onClick function being called. So let's go down to this attributes. And down here, somewhere within this attributes, let's just search. There should be this attribute called onClick. And I'm going to click on the drop-down menu, and I'm going to connect it to the onClick method. So this is basically connecting the event onClick to the event handler onClick. So to this method. And as you can see, it went from gray to orange because Android Studio is like, it can be called whenever my button's being clicked. So next, let's first start by just printing out something. System.out.println. So basically what's going to happen is that every time I'm going to click this button, it's going to print out clicked within the console down here. So let's test it out. I'm going to first run the app. It's going to, and it might take a little while since the simulator will have to start up. So right now, Gradle will first compile all of this code. And you can see the process down here running. And then it's going to have to start the simulator down here. And it's still building, so this will take a little bit. So for activity.main, something to keep in note is that you can have this completely design focused view where you only see like sort of what the app actually looks like, but you can also sort of view it as code. As you notice, it's an XML file, which means it's kind of like HTML where at the very end, it's just like tags and attributes. And you can see the actual code over here. So if you don't really like working in this sort of very design focused or design oriented workflow, you can actually work straight up work with the XML over here and sort of add all of these buttons and customize them in a very programmatic way. So it's just like it's basically Android app is built towards allowing you to work in different styles, basically. And there we go. So our button app is currently running. And you notice that when I click, it should print something down here. So there you go. Once you click on run, you can see that it's printed click twice in the console because I clicked on the button twice. And if I click on it again, it's going to print it a third time. And there we go. We've got a basic app running. So let me stop this for now. And let's go back to our code. So in general, you don't really want to print things in console when you're working on an app because your user is never really going to run an Android app straight out Android Studio, and they're not always going to have a terminal ready to see if anything prints. So let's actually so instead of like having something show in terminal, let's have it show on our app. So we're gonna just try to have it show on the text over here. We're gonna try to change this text view within our code. So first off, we're gonna have to find our text view within our resources or within like our current view. So we're gonna add this line text view text equals, I'm gonna have to cast it, but find view by ID. And I'm gonna first put in this code and I'm gonna explain to you in more detail later. So basically what this code is I'm gonna first have to find my text view within my app. So within this overarching view, I'm gonna have to find the starting text within it. So if I click on here, you can see that my text view is actually labeled text view 2. So like that's the resource name of this text view. So I'm going to have to basically find this. So what this find by view does is it finds a specific view that you pass the ID in. So like whatever ID you pass in, it's going to try to find that view. And this R is basically your resources. So capital R for resources. And then it's going to look within the IDs. And the ID name is text view 2. So I'm going to try to find text view 2 within my current view. And I'm going to cast it into a text view and store in this variable called text. So what we're going to do next is we're going to set the text within this text view. So text.set text. And we're going to set it to clicked. And we can even do something like, let's say, change the color of the label. So let's say like set text color. And we can make it, let's say, we'll make it some random color. Let's just put it like this. So I'm gonna just change the text from starting text to clicked with two exclamation points, and we're just gonna change the text color while we're at it too. So let's check it out. All right, so as you can see, we've loaded the app. When I click this button, the starting text and the color should change. And there we go. So this is basically how you'll program a basic Android app. I definitely haven't gone over all the possible like views within that like you can add to an Android app. Unfortunately, with the time we have, I can't exactly go over everything with you, but I would definitely recommend you check out like everything within the palette just to see like how much you can actually do within Android. And I would also recommend checking out like the official Android documentation. It will definitely go into a lot further detail than what I've gone to right now. All right, and finally, I'm gonna give just a few basic tips to keep in mind when you're doing mobile app development, and to be honest, like any sort of development in general. So first off, make sure to keep your code clean. It's more important to make sure that your code is readable than it is to make like your code efficient or fast. There will come a point in time when you're writing so much code that like if you can't read the code that you wrote 6 months ago easily, then you can really mess things up. So make sure to like keep your code organized and make sure that's always readable. This means like making variable names that make sense and even adding comments to parts of the code that you're afraid might not make sense to other people or to like your future self. Next is always test and debug. I think it's very important to make sure that every time you add a new feature, such or like even a new method or a new class to your code, always make sure you debug it and make sure that it doesn't break any part of your code. Also, make sure when you're testing something, test all possible cases. So don't just like assume that, oh, I'll always pass in numbers or something. Make sure you test even the weird cases. Like, what if I pass in a bunch of strings when it expects numbers or something? Make sure you test all possible cases. Think outside the box when you're testing, basically. Also, design before you code. So I find that for a lot of beginner coders, you get very excited to sort of jump right into making your first class, or like just getting to coding and figuring it all out along the way. But that's not always really efficient. Always make sure that you have your design done before you code, because sometimes like if you don't have a good plan in mind, you might code yourself into a corner where like your code is so messy, or like there's so many lines to a point like where it's not it's not even possible to really fix the code anymore. You sort of coded yourself into a corner. So before you really do anything, make sure that you have a clear plan in mind, and that you have a very clear goal, and that you've designed all your classes so that they're easy to use and they're easy to debug and test. And also, especially when it comes to using software such as Xcode and Android Studio, there are many ways to do the same thing. Just like you saw with the Android Studio demo, you can add a button in many different ways. You can add it through coding, or you can even add it like just by dragging and dropping a button into like your UI. Um, and this is important because when you go looking for solutions online, there are many different solutions and they might all be correct. So don't think that there's only one way to do one thing. When it comes to making software, there are many correct answers. It's all about like what the choosing a answer that you want is all about, like sort of weighing the costs versus the benefits. And next, finally, I'm just going to give some basic tips on Googling. So when you're developing software, a lot of times you're just going to want to Google, um, especially when it comes to like to classes and like to like lessons like this. I'm not able to teach you everything. And honestly, like even when in college, like your professors won't be able to teach you everything. Google is your friend when it comes to that. When it comes to like debugging, even like learning new languages, Google is your friend. It's very helpful to have good search engine skills. Um, However, like when it comes to like reading things online, not everything is correct and not everything is up to date. And if you like copy and paste code from like Stack Overflow or something, it might actually break your code. So some make sure that when you're finding solutions online, make sure you're using reliable resources. First off, official documentation, such as like documentation from Apple or Android, those are the most reliable resources that you can have. The next most reliable would probably be tutorials, such as like tutorials from websites that are highly trusted, such as Geeks for Geeks or like W3 Schools. Those are also pretty good sites. Also, just like I said before, there are many solutions to one problem. Um, Often when like you go on forums or Stack Overflow or something, you'll find people arguing about like, no, this is the right answer or that is the right answer. Um, don't be fooled. Like there are many right answers to one problem. However, like not all solutions are 100% perfect. So like maybe you found a really sketchy answer from like Stack Overflow in like the replies or something. Um, just be aware that the sketchier the solution gets, the more likely bugs are to happen. So just because you found a solution online on Reddit or like on some forum, don't trust that's always going to be correct. Even in like professional like software, sometimes like strange bugs will happen because people just copy and pasted code from solutions they found online. Try to avoid that. So make sure when like when you're copying and pasting a solution, make sure you actually understand what's going on, and don't just like blindly copy and paste, because that can also have very unintended side effects. And finally, here are just some extra resources that I think would be very useful. This is just 2 very basic tutorials going over what I went over this lesson, just in case you want to read it sort of in writing. And that's all for this lesson. Have fun making your apps, and I'll see you next week.